and you should have in front of you now some Google images.
Yes, we do.
Yep.
Right, okay. The first one I thought I'd start with is one that the Western Australians are now looking at, and it raises some concerns for me. It's on one of my priorities to deal with. It's now been a problem for a number of months and nothing has happened. This is a poplar, and you can see some little dark patches here. See those dark patches?
Yeah.
Yep.
Are those holes?
They are holes that are filling out with garbage, yeah, essentially. And so nothing particularly exciting, just oozing out with gunk. But this is Polyphagus shothole borer. It's an exotic insect that in particular causes significant problems for trees that have what the Europeans like to affectionately call ripe wood, or wood that does not have a lot of extractives. So poplars, willows, liriodendron, acer, the trees that when you cut them down, you don't see a dark colored heartwood. They're our Polyphagus, they're our ripe wood, or no proper dark heartwood that looks different. And it's in Western Australia. It's been introduced to Perth, and we still have no quarantine regulations restricting its movement of plant material from Perth to the eastern states. We've got it going the other way. We can't send stuff over, but this raises concerns for me because at this stage I can still buy plant material from Perth and have it exported to Sydney, and I just see this as being something that will end up bringing it back into the country. So Polyphagus shothole borer is a borer that goes in, eats through the wood tissue, the dead xylem, and introduces a fungus with it to help make digesting effective. And of course, it destroys the inside and can lead to failure of the trees. And you can see here galleries of the borer. So it's quite a small borer. It's Buprestidae. Buprestidae, for those of you who are trying to recall things, are beetles. So beetles are Coleoptera. Buprestidae are, Curculionidae, not Buprestidae, the Curculionidae are the weevil group. So this is one of the weevil families. And a number of those weevils, things like ambrosia and things like that, will carry with them fungus. They have a special fungus carrying section on some of them called mycangia, and they cause problems by introducing fungus into trees, and so that could be problematic. Those of you in Victoria, we're sending you down pine nematode, pine root nematode. Again, we're going to send that down with beetles. Just like you send elm leaf beetles up to us, we must return the favour and destroy them. So again, quarantining is something that we've not really mastered well in Australia. There's a bit of an old joke that, Victoria has quarantining down reasonably well. New South Wales, if anything gets in, we just have effectively lost control fairly quickly. And if we're really going to criticise, if it's Queensland, they've probably introduced that the government was probably responsible. So there's a point to which I guess you see that these things can be problematic and will be problematic. So there we are, Polyphagus shothole borer. It's certainly causing concerns in Perth. They're removing trees because of it. And so I do see that the probability is it will come and will end up within in the eastern states. This is the same area, interestingly, as a leaning tree. Would you guess that tree at some stage or other moved rapidly in the ground? What do you think?
Yeah, looks like it.
Yeah.
Yeah. How stable do you think it is?
I think it's probably stabilised itself since it moved over.
Yeah, I think so, Peter. I mean, as you get to the top, it straightens out. One of the things to remember now is all of this trunk is pushing into the ground. So it's got to lift these lower bits up in direct leverage. So again, leaning tree, in spite of the fact that Department of Education in New South Wales considers that a removal situation, I see that as quite an interesting tree and something that should try and keep where we can rather than getting rid of.
The issue though could be if we get a lot of wet weather and the soil gets soft. I had a situation locally here where leaning tree had been stable for many years, but in the very wet weather it heaved, it moved, and you could see clearly that it moved quite a bit. And because the soil was so wet, we was leaning over a busy road, so we did take it out.
Yeah, look, and there's no doubt about that. And those of you who have been in the East Coast may have seen, and it'll be interesting to see if anyone has, please say. But, you know, I went out and looked at a tree. It was a olive, Oleus Europea cuspidata, the African wild olive. And the person was concerned about it because they'd had slumping and a whole section of their the land upslope had slumped down. And this was above that. They were looking at getting rid of it. And I'm thinking, exactly the opposite. I'm thinking it hasn't slumped during that wet weather, and it's being held in place by that and a fig. Keep the trees. The trees have value in holding the soil together. So it's a difficult one, Peter.
Yep.
But again, it shows you that process of valuing the fact that trees don't have to be straight up. And those of you who are in Sydney, who's been out to see the Bland Street Oak yet? Has anyone?
Yep. Yeah, that's amazing.
Has anyone else who's in Sydney hands? Yeah, okay. Bland Street Oak is in Bland Street, Carramar. It's a must-see tree. I say to every student, it's the best tree in Sydney by a long way. Everyone says, how can I say that? After they've seen it, everyone agrees that it's probably the best tree in Sydney. It's a truly a wonderful one. The next closest one to it is the tree at Harold Park, the fig tree at Harold Park. I think it's got a fairly close second. So polyphagous short-hole borer is going to be an issue. It's not so much a problem for eucalypts, but it does attack the sapwoods of other trees. So things like poinciana, ficus, where you're getting the wood breaks down rapidly. The problems there. Of course, we've got similar borers already in Australia, that sort of situation. So the next one I want to look at is, I went to a school in the last month and I thought it might be worthwhile having a look at. I noticed as I went to the school that there was quite a few trees that were declining or dead. And again, for those of you who have had the heavy rains, and that's Sydney and above, or Wollongong and above, maybe even Bega and above, incredible rainfalls this year. I mean, Sydney's had about 1,200 mils already this year. Annual average is about 900 mil. So we're not even much past half, way over our average. So somebody's got children playing in the background.
Yeah, somebody on the phone.
Sorry.
That's okay.
Sorry.
Yeah, I just get you to.
I thought I was on mute still.
Yeah, that would be great. Thank you.
Yeah, sorry.
So we've got these trees that are stressed, and I thought, first of all, well, maybe saturation. And this is a grey box. It's not a great shot of it, but Eucalyptus monicana. And we had an outbreak in Sydney of grey box psyllid. We had 3. Who's got the children in the background? Mute.
Somebody with a phone ending 732. Could you mute the?
Yeah.
Thanks. Okay, great. So yes, I thought first of all it might have been grey box psyllid, so I thought I'll have a look at that in a bit more detail. And you can see sparse canopy, you know, little patches of regrowth. Certainly a cause for concern. If in case you're wondering why my finger's up, when I'm taking a grove of a lot of trees, I want some way of indicating what tree. So a tip, a pen, the corner of a piece of paper, whatever, something to point to the tree. So I know that this tree, for example, is a tree that's got a declining canopy. So it just allows me then when I go back to the normal shot to be able to put my arrow here and not forget, because Owen, you're going to find this hard to believe, but I've got a brain like a sieve. I forget things. And by the time I've seen another 200 or 300 trees after inspecting this one, I'll forget things. So just taking a photograph like that's a throwaway. I'll delete them eventually, but it lets me see what trees I'm actually talking about. So I've got these trees that seem to be declining. This is a tree that has had a partial failure. It's a grey box, and it horrifies people, but that's got a Philonous fruiting body as well. And so my position on that was it can stay for the time being, except now it's been stressed, and a stressed tree is far less able to deal with things. So now I'm a little bit more concerned, and I've indicated that to the client. But you can see the canopies are looking fairly sparse. Again, just Mark communicating with Mark, tree number 4, 1, 2, 3, 4 fingers. That's, anything I can to try and reduce notes. And
Listen, I'm in a meeting. I need you to be quiet.
Dead tree again, another one. Don't know what's happening there. Again, more dead trees. That's 7, in case you're wondering, 6 and 7. I'm getting all these dead trees everywhere, and you know this is dying back. Would you agree? Anyone agree that there's just something not looking right with that tree compared with those trees? And it's really odd for a large number of trees to go at once. So by this stage, I've figured out what the problem is. Anyone want to have a guess?
It's called Makita Bora.
This is in a school, so it would be nice, but no, there's no Makita Bora on this one, but you're very close, Michele. It is indeed herbicide damage.
It's the ground crew spraying around the tree, perhaps, or
Broadleaf.
Spraying with what?
it must be some tough herbicide, because usually glyphosate does not do much to the trees when you spray it on the ground.
Yeah, glyphosate binds with the soils generally unless you put large amounts. So if you spill your glyphosate, you tip it out, tip a litre out underneath a tree, you will cause harm to the tree. But this is not that. This is far.
Would it be an ester?
Lawn weeder.
A lawn weeder, so a broadleaf.
Broadleaf.
Yeah, selective herbicide, as they call them. And indeed, that's what had been used in this instance.
Yeah.
And controlling their bindii. The gentleman got the spray. I'll pull up the label in a second. And you can see that they've just absolutely hammered themselves trying to control secondary weeds. Now, not all of those will be necessarily, but here's our label: Super Way Buffalo selective herbicide, great selective. You can read the label. It's really obscure, but somewhere in there it says do not use underneath the canopy of a tree, under the drip line of a tree. And that's all it gives. One little line in one page, whoops, 1 page, 2 page. You know, nothing that gives you anything makes it easy to find. But in fact, our active constituent here, or the herbicide that we've got concern about, is this little beast in here. Let's find it. MCPA, which is a herbicide that if it's washed onto roots in any quantity, problematic.
Excuse me, Mark. Can the person with the phone ending 732 please mute your microphone?
It is on mute.
Okay, well, I'm still getting some
Maybe
noise.
someone else.
Might be somebody else, yeah.
Okay.
But I don't.
Sorry, yeah, it is on mute at the moment.
Okay.
I was struggling to work it on my phone before. That's why I was struggling when the kids were yelling. But
Yeah, I can.
I definitely had it mute.
Sorry, I don't know your name because it doesn't come up.
Yes. Sorry, I'm Bernie. Sorry, I didn't
Bernie,
put it
that's
on when
okay. Bernie, I'm going to try.
logged in late. So
I'm going to try and mute it from this end as well.
I'm not able to
Yeah.
from my end.
Yeah, I've done that. So I've muted you, Bernie. So if you want to say something, just put your hand up and we'll go from there.
thank you. Thank you.
Okay,
No,
thank you.
it hasn't done it. You're right. It's not muting you.
I still hasn't. I'll go to another room.
No, it's fine. Yeah. I don't know why it's not doing that. Peter, you might follow up with that later on. Oh, yes, anyhow, there are a whole pile of herbicides that fit into that category that are toxic to trees in low levels. And so having done that, I thought it would be nice to have a look at some poisoning today, both lethal and sublethal. Now, difference between the two, you can guess. Lethal kills, sublethal side effects. And we'll be able to see some of those side effects. So just go up, and I've got a swag of them, and I've categorized a number of these, so it's not that my computer's that smart. But here's sublethal herbicide application, shortened nodes, okay? And something's affecting the electron chain transfer process of photosynthesis. So we're getting this chlorosis occurring. So they're two really good indicators of sublethal. Again, some distortion of the tissue. Chlorosis, for those of you who don't know, is the paling between the veins. So that's chlorosis. So, I mean, this is a weed. So, yeah, obviously, here we've got an application that hasn't been strong enough. Again, same process here. This is Meliozederac as a seedling. It's not a weed in most cases, but here it is.
Do we know what herbicide was responsible, Mark?
In most cases, no, Peter. I'm guessing this was probably glyphosate, if I can figure out where it was taken. No.
Doesn't look like glyphosate. It looks more like metsulfuron to me.
Yeah, metsulfuron, triazine, atrazine, one of those group, probably.
Roundup tends to make the leaves kind of wrinkle.
Yes, we'll have a look at some Roundup. Again, this is our Bindii killer here that's been affecting the tree. So it's actually caused loss of foliage. The lawn area was, suspected. I got little dead patches in the lawn. It's usually a pretty good indicator that somebody's sprayed. That wasn't so much the problem. The lawn care company had done that. The problem ended up being she'd used a once a year weeder on her pavement, her pavers, and that had been the problem. And householders are notorious for over applying, and I'll probably get into trouble for it. But I think I've told you the joke before where the guy wakes up in the middle of the night and says, "So do I, so do I." This is one of those situations where a little is good, but a lot is not good. And in fact, the little herbicide we're looking at earlier on is an auxin-based herbicide. So it emulates auxin. And we know of a couple of others that have been used like that, 2,4,5-T and 2,4-D. And those two mixed together created a product that we affectionately called Agent Orange. So these are nasty chemicals in terms of what they do to plant material. They cause leaf abscission, death. They cause massive division of the meristematic tissue, or the meristematic tissue not to function properly, and then they croak it. So indeed, that was an over application of things. Here's a metsulfuron one, Peter.
Oh, yeah.
A whole grove of trees. In this case, metsulfuron comes with a warning label. It says, first of all, keep your tank agitated at all times. Second of all, don't spray underneath the canopy of trees. Well, I don't know how you would spray on this property and not spray underneath the canopy of the trees. It just so happens that metsulfuron is really good at controlling asparagus fern and really good at killing trees. So sandy soils makes it worse, even still. So they went and tried to control the asparagus fern and ended up killing a whole pile of trees. And again, there's a lethal and a sublethal application available on this particular herbicide. At sublethal levels, it causes distortion of the tissue, and we'll have a look at that. I've got a whole pile from an accidental aerosol application from a manufacturer, I won't mention them, up into the atmosphere, and it wiped out an area of trees that was probably about 1.5 kilometres long, about 150 metres wide and about 500 metres long on adjoining properties. So we'll have a look at that. Rapid abscission, rapid loss of leaves. What causes it? Why is it happening? And I've got to say that I think some poisonings that occur are accidental. So, for example, the trees on that school, accidental. The GA didn't find it, may not have even been on the label. It wouldn't surprise me that there's a label out there that doesn't have it, but I did lift it off the commercial copy of the label where it says don't use underneath the canopy of the trees. But so here I've got a tree that's shedding rapidly. And when I say a tree shedding rapidly, I've got to ask what and why. The next question I've got to ask is, how do I think the herbicide, if it is a herbicide or the chemical, same difference, how did the chemical get onto the tree? How did it affect the tree? You know, did someone squirt it? Did someone spill it? Did it put it down a drain? And I think one of those accidental applications is that plumbers, I'm not wanting to be critical of them, but plumbers sometimes think, oh, look, it's just a root. It's in the drain. I fixed the drain on the neighbour's property. I'll just paint the end of the root with a bit of Roundup. And that painting the end of the root with a bit of Roundup is not too good. Another way you can get accidental poisoning is root-to-root grafting.
Mm.
And you'll get that on same species and same genera. And so you've got to be careful if you're cutting a tree down and then poisoning the stump, that you don't have any trees of the same species, definitely, and genus preferably. Roots graft easier than above ground parts. And the reason they graft with greater ease is there's no movement. So it's just about contact, about pressure, a wound. Once you get a wound, then you can get grafting. Okay, Makita borer. Michele, you raised them earlier on, and they're usually a fairly good indication that something is wrong. But I've noticed as I've got older that people are getting slimier. I don't know whether that's a nasty thing to say, but I'm now finding them drill holes in roots. So I've got to trace roots back. I'm finding drill holes that have been filled with gum nuts and sawdust and bits of bark put back over the top of them to make them look like there's nothing there, filled with silicon and bark glued back on so that the bark actually covers each hole. But you can see some indicators. So here we get an area of necrotic tissue around the injection. So that can often give you a hint as to where you might want to be looking. There, you know, again, easy, just put a few bits and pieces around it and it becomes harder to see that hole. This is an interesting one. I think we talked about this in one of the early ones. This is a problem in Adelaide. Now, this was called Mandela yellows. Did anyone read about that or see it? It was a disease going through Adelaide that just seemed to be spreading along the roadsides quite rapidly. And indeed, this is one of those atrazine or triazine symmetric triazine herbicides, and it's causing chlorosis. It's interfering with the electron chain transfer. Those of you who didn't look at photosynthesis in detail or haven't, there's a little process that allows electrons to be moved in the process of photosynthesis. It's part of what makes protons and the like move around. And when you interfere with that, you're sending a message back to the tree that says the chloroplast is not photosynthesizing properly, so it starts to drop the amount of chlorophyll, and so you get this piling out. And so this is along a main road, and you can see the evidence that they've sprayed, just as obvious as anything. And so it's still a problem in Adelaide, still misapplication of chemicals. Another problem with some of these things, so we've talked about the 2,4,5-T, the 2,4-Ds, those group of things, the once a year weeders. A lot of those chemicals are designed and manufactured to be readily dissolvable in water. And you get a dry period and then a wet period where it washes to the roots. You just need contact with the roots to start causing problems. And so in a place like Adelaide, it's probably a little bit more problematic than it might be in say, the Northern Rivers, Peter.
Mm.
This is pretty obvious that it's been poisoned. This is a camphor laurel. And camphor laurel is one of those lovely trees, beautiful trees that you can poison. And I've got a sample that was given to me by Wallingbar TAFE of a tree that had been, a camphor laurel that had been injected and poisoned probably 20 times. And it ended up keeping on growing, occluding over those injection holes and continuing to grow. If you want to see a copy of that picture, email Peter and I'll put it on the Dropbox. I think it's pretty great to see. So camphor laurels are hard, kill. This is a counsel, this is deliberate. So this is not accidental. This tree has been poisoned, is not to say that they've found somebody else that's done it. The council's done this in preparation for removal of the tree. So it gives you an idea of how hard it can be to kill some trees. You can see here I pulled the bark off. I couldn't see the damage apart from this oblique area of necrosis. And so there was just something not right there. Out came the hori-hori. Those of you who don't know what a hori-hori is, a little soil knife that's used in Japanese bonsai and other gardening purposes. And it's just a great tool to have with you as an arborist. Pick them up for about, I don't know, $45 or $50, something like that. So I carry one on my hip, pulled that out, and there's the hole. Sorry about the focus. But yeah, so people will do all sorts of things to conceal. But you can see, you know, what's happening in the canopy, some necrosis, you know, what's causing that. You know, it's pretty obvious that something's happened here. You know, this pattern of necrosis is unusual. And so again, some form of herbicide. Now we could have two sorts here. We could have something that's a systemic that they've put on and it's done some localized damage and the figs controlled it, or it could be something that is phytotoxic. By phyto, it means plant, so phytotoxic, toxic to plant material. And sort of things that you could fit into that category would be diesel, kerosene, alcohol. So there's all sorts of things that you could be using to cause problems by topical application. I don't know which of those it was. That was in one of the roots on the neighbouring property. So you can see the size of the hole, 3/4 inch hole. There are some borers that make perfectly round holes. There are a whole pile of them, in fact. But none of them come to a nice rounded or spade end. So don't go sticking your fingers in borer holes in general. It's not a good principle, particularly Owen down your end of the world. And even, you know, when you're talking about taree, there's hydronicky, tree funnel web, can give you a really nasty nip, make you quite sick, won't kill you, or at least no one's been killed by one for ages. But, you know, shine a light down and have a look. If it's Indoxula, the wood moths, they have a tunnel that curves towards the end. It'll be perfectly straight, but it'll have a curve to it. So you'll realize it's not. So again, this one was in the mulch. hidden below the ground, had to dig out to find it and then put a stick in it so that I could indicate it was there. So people are getting a little bit more creative. But again, there are little telltale signs, as I said, like the necrosis. And poisoning is interesting. There are a few other things that can look like poisoning. Anyone want to guess what else might look like poisoning?
Some fungi that attack roots, and you get sudden dieback leaves.
Yep.
That can be quite fast. Phytophthora can be quite bad.
Yeah, Phytophthora armillaria, good. If you're getting up north, it can look fairly similar to Phelinus noxious as well, so it might fit into that. Anoxia, so suffocation of the roots, so lack of oxygen, can look the same. Lightning strike is another one that looks very similar. So that's another one that you can have a look for. And again, they each have unique little telltale signs. But sometimes it can be difficult and you've just got to say, I don't know. I mean, there's many a times when I looked at a tree and said, that's been poisoned. The color of the foliage changes when they use Roundup. Glyphosate gives a different hue to the foliage. But yes, it can be puzzlesome to find out where they've put stuff in. So it's, like finding the root, moving the debris from over the top of the root system. And there it was hidden underneath some mulch. This is, sudden loss of green, all the leaves retain. So this process of marquescence, marquescence is hanging on to the dead parts. For example, oak is a marquescent species naturally. Phoenix canariensis is a marquescent palm. Well, bunyias don't hold on to dead foliage like that. So there's something wrong. And there's the answer. Nice and obvious. It's a construction site. Unfortunately, both trees were killed. That was in Strathfield. Not the clearest picture, but this is distorted tissue on a jacaranda. Lots of this production of weird buds. So this is a sublethal herbicide damage. And that something else can look like that. What else can look like that? Anyone seen that on something else?
You have maybe aphids can deform new growth.
So hemiptera or
scale, yeah.
Yeah, the hemiptera group. So small hemiptera, things like adelgids on pinus, but the one that would normally be associated with this sort of degree of distortion would probably be mites, because you won't see them easily. So mites can look fairly similar. When it's broad spread over a tree, you can usually skip mites from being the cause. But this clustering of massive amounts of buds is a sublethal thing. A client called me out, can we construct around the tree? And by the time I put my screwdriver in through the holes, I said, no, it's dead. Again, these small clusters of buds. This is metsulfurin, Peter. That's
okay.
Here's a thing, why the tree's looking funny? And I see a whole pile of stuff that's been poisoned off on the ground below. So this could have been an accidental application of a herbicide that's affecting the above section. And again, I've got this rapid division of the apical bud, but not lots of elongation. So I'm getting division, but not getting longer. So again, sublethal damage. Sublethal damage on jacaranda. This is glyphosate poisoning. I think you talked about that earlier, Peter. So getting the application right is important, even to using glyphosate to kill trees, not something that you want to be doing. Here's another good telltale sign. So the tree's been poisoned and they've filled up the holes, and then they've had some rain or the like. You've had stem flow, the holes have filled up, overflowed, and you can see the burning and killing of the adjacent lawn from that process. So this can happen with lightning, but it tends not to happen in such a broad area. Holes are always a great giveaway. It said some dead stuff on the ground is a giveaway. This is one I won't mention the name of the place. This is on the old M4 freeway, and it concerned me that I started to see a number of figs die. Figs are, you know, you don't expect things to die quite readily, and particularly young things. These are only probably 35 or so years old. But I can see herbicide application. So is it possible that the trees have been affected by herbicide? My conclusion was yes. And again, Peter, metsulfurin, the triazines, the atrazines, any of that group could have been responsible. Notice here, see the white in the foliage on the grass? This is again the electron chain transfer process being interfered with. And here we have a process known as etiolation. Etiolation means deactivation of the chloroplast altogether. The chloroplast is packaged up into a different form called an etioplast. And this is what happens when you leave something on your lawn. Your lawn changes color and goes pale, and then white is etiolation. So that's one of those symptoms. So you can see the trees, there's clearly something wrong here. I'm not saying the guy with the billboard outside the Bunnings store on the M4 freeway was responsible. And I'm not saying he wasn't, but I would be guessing. And I'm guessing it was intentional, and I'll show you why in a few more minutes. So lots of spraying off. I suspect he ducked past late on an afternoon or early on a morning, had a contract to go in and do it, and did it with the intention to kill the trees. Signs going up again. I can tell you the experience. Danielle Austin's not with us tonight. I don't know whether anyone from Blacktown is, but they tried this, and the mayor issued an order to get the sign off straight away and remove it. You need a policy to do this. And I think the heroes of my mind in that regard are Wollongong Council. Wollongong Council developed a policy, put it out to public comment, had it voted in. So it's in their policies, and all they're doing is following policy. And of course, once you've got a policy that's been put in place, you don't want to be a individual elected member saying, don't follow the policy. Because when you say that, the question must be asked, well, why don't you want to follow it? You know, it starts to become problematic. So I think it's a great process indicating that it's been poisoned. I think it's somewhat embarrassing to people whose trees are out the front of. Most people would assume that the person immediately behind the tree is the responsible party, although that's not always the case. In this instance, I would say it probably was Lophostomen confertus. And again, you know, just incredible loss to society. That's probably a 60 or 70-year-old tree, you know, but it's not going to fall over. And it sits there as an edifice, almost with the finger stuck up, saying it's poison. And a number of councillors that are doing it. So back to our poison trees, I had to figure out what was happening, and I got consent from the council to go collect some samples. But here's my first wonderful fun on this one. That's a copper nail. Somebody had gone in and tried to poison them with copper nails. Now, good news or bad news? A copper nail's toxic. What do you think?
Isn't copper used as a fungicide?
It is used as a fungicide. Good. Yep.
It will probably cause necrosis of the tissues around the nail, but not kill the tree.
Good, good. So it's phytotoxic, but it's not mobile. So it kills off the surrounding tissue. So if you wanted to kill off a tree with copper nails, you would need to put them in, depending on the vascular structure of the plant, somewhere between every 8 to 10 mils to somewhere around about every 20 mils apart. around the tree to kill it off. That's a fairly laborious task. I don't think most people are going to do that. But it does cause localized tissue damage. And you see exactly the same thing to some extent when you put a zinc nail in a tree. The zinc is also phytotoxic. And so, again, nails really shouldn't go in the tree. And of course, if you look at it, even a standard bright nail with not much of a coating that rusts away quickly, you've all seen the staining inside wood that causes. So copper nails are not toxic. In fact, copper is used to install a lightning protection system. So if you're installing a lightning protection system, you need to use copper. So that gives you an idea that it's not going to kill, it just causes an injury. And that's an injury in that case where you trade off the injury to the plant, and the plant will grow back around it, as you can see here. So I'm pretty sure now that that wasn't accidental, that it wasn't intentional, but you can see the localized damage from figs from putting those copper nails in. Again, more of this this process of etiolation starting on the leaf. And so somebody had gone out and intentionally poisoned those trees. This again is, and you'll see this occasionally, this is a variegation that's been again caused by interference with the photosynthetic pathway. This is on casuarina. There's also a variegated form of casuarina, a couple of them, that has a similar acabano look to them. So it's not always going to be herbicide damage. Just be aware that some variegations can look similar. And here, this is where one of the copper nails is completely occluded by the growth of the tree. So again, copper will not kill the tree. Again, more of that process. And in my hand, by the way, that's a handle of a soil knife. But yes, start keeping an eye open for that. And in fact, what's interesting is they didn't just do the poisoning once, they tried twice with the copper nails to see if they could get that to work. So the fact that somebody surreptitiously does that in the middle of the night makes me think that the herbicide damage was probably intentional, and given that the only party that was really going to benefit was the billboard owner outside the Bunnings store at Auburn, it might give you the idea that that billboard operator was probably taking the law unto himself. Oh, okay. I think we can be pretty sure that that might be herbicide damage, but again, it could be application by a spray, or it could be a misapplication of a chemical. What other chemicals could cause that sort of damage, do you think?
Oh, excess fertilizer.
Excess fertilizer. Fertilizer, wonderful. So yes, the soluble fertilizers can cause a similar burning of the tissue. Salt damage can cause a similar thing. It's got some unusual patterns, so it's probably been sprayed. And I'm not going to say that it's the case, but this tree at the back had some drill holes into the roots, and there was a dispute between these two neighbours. This unusual spray pattern occurred in both the front and the backyard of their property. I'm not saying the owner did, but probably someone associated with the owner of that property. Why am I not saying the owner? Because I don't know whether they've got a lunatic child or a lunatic friend. And that's one of the problems with poisoning, is unless the person is caught, there's not much you can do. If the person is caught, there are things you can do. You can report it to the police. They'll generally laugh. You can report it to the EPA, and there's a Pesticides Act in almost every jurisdiction, and this would be a breach of the Pesticides Act. And I have a client who copped a rather large fine for doing exactly that, of poisoning the neighbour's trees. And so, yes, I work for the good guys and the bad guys. My job's to be the worker. There's the herbicide damage around that tree at the back. That was their tree was looking poor, and then they said, "Oh, you've got to come around and have a look at the next person." So there's 3 properties, and both neighbouring properties are being affected by this one person. So cut root, apply some glyphosate. You can see the damage, and there's the backyard. So you can see again an unusual spray pattern that would tend to suggest that a person standing somewhere about where my mouse is now has sprayed with glyphosate. And I have to say, there have been moments when I've wanted to get out there with my water gun, my big Nerf water gun, fill it up with Roundup and spray people's yards that poison trees and spray their house with paint, because I just get so frustrated about it. But they're not things that you should ever do. It's just that I'm letting you know that, yes, it is frustrating, okay? Because this is what I'd call intentional herbicide damage. You can see the patch around it again. They've applied it, painted it on, but some rains come along and you can see the localized necrosis around it. And that's the tree itself. Sublethal herbicide damage. This is a sad one. This is glyphosate poisoning. So it's that distorted tissue again. Glyphosate gets a bad rap. It's actually a wonderful herbicide, and it's just sadly maligned of late. Glyphosate applied at or in contact with the human being at rates that have never been even suggested can be carcinogenic or may be carcinogenic. And don't spray it on yourself. Don't mix it with your hand. Don't drink it. There was a guy who used to go around shows in the US drinking the stuff to prove that it wasn't toxic. Well, yeah, its LD50 is really small, but you just don't go doing that, okay? So provided you take appropriate management use of a herbicide, glyphosate is just a wonderful herbicide, and glyphosate bioactive has got real great applications near waterways. So in this case, the person had tipped out their excess spray bottle underneath the tree. They thought, yep, not going to affect the tree. But there it was. It had caused sublethal herbicide damage to the tree, really knocked the crap out of it. Again, it appears to affect the electron chain transfer process. And it tends to stay present for quite a number of months or longer. I had it on an Angelica that someone accidentally sprayed. So we use a marker dye when we spray on the property here. And the reason we use a marker dye is so we can see where the apprentice sprays and what things he hits. And it's amazing how much that teaches you about spraying. So I encourage you, if you are using an applicator, just to use some spray color so that you can see. Washes off after a few rainfalls. So but unfortunately that affected the tree. Now I'm not going to mention any names, I promise that, but this has had some herbicide damage. It's just down the road from this thing, and they said that they weren't responsible, so take them at their word. But we're getting some necrosis at the tips of foliage, some clustering of the foliage again, trees dying off. Oh, look at the shortened node on the Phoenix palm. See how short the new front is? So that's a little unusual. Dead bits out of sequence. This could be fusarium, may not be. Didn't get tested positive. All these trees died. These were all microcories. Everyone died. We had grasses in the area dying. It was a pretty unusual pattern. I'm not saying that it was a leak at any local plant, but you can see the number of trees that were affected in a pattern downwind from the factory. Again, these shortened nodes, rapid division. So the apical bud stops extending and you get this massive division. And I'm pretty sure that this is a plant that produces metsulfurin, Peter.
Mm-hmm.
So that might give you some things. And there was talk that the HEPA filter might not have been properly in place when they were manufacturing, and there could have been some gaseous distribution. And so just huge amounts of damage to all sorts of trees. Again, good indication that a herbicide or an abiotic factor is involved is when you're getting more than just a limited range of species being affected. You know, there's nothing similar between Tristaniopsis and Platanus and Eucalyptus. They're just so broadly apart. And so you can see that pattern of decline. And we could narrow it down to when the poisoning occurred. We could narrow that down to a several week period because some deciduous trees were affected and some deciduous trees weren't. That allowed us to get a fairly narrow time frame. So again, buds being produced everywhere, things not working right. And you can see this massive clustering of buds and failure to elongate. So this is, again, that sublethal poisoning. Tissue deformation, this is all ficus. Is it ficus or Syzygium? It might be Syzygium. But you can see the leaves are not normal.
Mark?
Yes.
Glyphosate causes the distortion of the leaves, clustering of buds, and it's very peculiar, very typical that are other herbicides causing the same type of signs on
Yes,
the tree, or do they just go straight, like dropping all their leaves or going brown real quick?
This is sublethal metsulfurin poisoning. And I showed you one earlier on that had some sublethal. I thought I had them tagged, but I didn't. So I've just gone through some of my images and tagged poison, which is what you're looking at now. So yes, this is typical of metsulfurin. And it's all about dose. So when the dose is high enough, it kills. When the dose isn't high enough, it causes tissue deformation. I mean, you know, yes, that could be mites, but to get a mite that attacks 5 or 6 different genera and is able to become rampant would first of all be unusual. And secondly, sitting there with a loop or an iPhone or with the zoom on or a nice Olympus TG5 or 6 or whatever you're using, you can pretty quickly eliminate mites being the cause. Mites are annoying because they can be present all the same and not necessarily the cause of it. Because we've created all these nice little galleries. And in fact, if you look carefully, there's one little thread here that probably is from a mite, but mites aren't the cause of the problem. So this is a different one. This is some dead tips at the Regatta Centre at Penrith. And I got called in because all of a sudden things weren't doing well. Trees were suddenly dying off and declining. So they weren't sure what the problem was. Again, this gives you a little bit of a hint of what might be happening. Chlorotic foliage developing. And I don't know where you see, but it's in a lawn area. So the first thing I started to look for was broadleaf weeds that were dead. Indeed, there were broadleaf weeds that were dead. And this was simply, again, a misapplication of I think it was Bindi in this particular case, is again one of those broadleaf selective herbicides. So again, you know, destroys trees. What do you do when that happens? As soon as you start seeing the shedding, and deciduous trees can be particularly susceptible spraying underneath them. Once you see the leaves start to drop, irrigate to the absolute max. You want to try and dilute the herbicide down as far as possible. You will get tip dieback, but they can and do recover. We had a spray rig malfunction at Richmond TAFE, and it had spilt herbicide underneath a whole pile of ginkgo biloba, and that's all we could do is wash them out. It set them back probably 4 or 5 years, but they did recover. So it is possible to get them to recover from that sort of damage. But again, you can see that telltale signs, these big patches of dead brown areas in the lawn just should alert you to the fact that spraying has gone on. You can see those patches. So on really low levels of application of these hormonal based herbicides, so that's your auxins and your 2,4,5-Ds and 2,4,5-Ts, those sort of things. Production of ethanol and then abscisic acid is a typical response to shedding of the foliage is your first giveaway. And I guarantee you, November almost every year, I will get 2 or 3 call outs to go look at sites where the trees have started to shed their foliage, and almost inevitably 2 out of the 3 are related to the application of lawn care products. Bindi. So yes, okay, obviously drill holes, there lots and lots and lots. These are drill holes outside what used to be the Commonwealth Bank in St Mary's. They've now cut down all those trees. This is a slightly different one. This is more perplexing. Got some grass that's dying off, some plants that are burning off over a broad area. You can see here we've got material here that's dead and dead and dead, and tips to the banks here. This is down in the waterfront. Lots of dead areas, burning to the tips of the casuarinas, the banksias, you name it. It just really was copping and tanning. Does anyone want to have a guess on that one? I thought, first of all, it must have been a spill. That was my first, until
Spray drift.
so I'm going to say what the thought was.
Yeah, spray drift. Would it be, you know, like an ester that had...
It's close to a spray drift. Yeah, it's really what's happened. In this case, this is an AVTUR poisoning. Aviation turbine fuel is dumped. So if you get something like a Boeing 747, it takes off about 415 ton and can't come down with a full tank of fuel. So it's got to get rid of about 1,000 litres. I wish they'd just send along a hose down to my trucks and fill them up, but it's going to dump it into the atmosphere. And it does it at enough height that by the time it hits the ground, it's vaporized. So it doesn't do anything, except on cold, humid days, that doesn't always work. And the turbine fuel hits the water, and in this case, an offshore wind blowing it up has blown it up and burnt the waxy cuticle off the leaf. And so it's just an application of a topical basis. So it's exactly the same process that happens. Michele, you might have seen this. David, you probably never have, but when the guys fill up the chainsaw on the grass and they overfill and it spills and you burn the grass, the burning is simply taking the waxy layer off and then it dehydrates. Someone's raised a question in the chat. Can tree tissue be, can you test the tissue? Yes, the dilemma is you've got to start narrowing down the herbicide of concern. You can also test the soil. So something like MPCA has a half-life of about 24 days. So, you know, you can test for quite some time afterwards, depending on the herbicide used. But you don't want to test for every herbicide, otherwise you'll spend a fortune. So ideally you should have some narrowing of the process down to help make the process quicker and easier, and therefore more affordable. I believe Sydney Soil Environmental Laboratory, Cecil, does herbicide testing still. I don't know of anywhere else. I know EPA, which is they do testing because they enforce the herbicide or the pesticide legislation, but I don't know of anyone else. So yes, that's a nasty little process. Again, if we're right, you'd expect the top of the plant that emerges out of the plastic to burn and all the tissue below not to burn. So again, little telltale signs. You expect upper canopy stuff to burn and under canopy stuff not to. And so quite a lot of damage caused by it. This is where it started for me. The person was concerned that the neighbour had poisoned their trees. And so...
How did you figure that out? That was jet fuel.
Well, it can't be aviation petrol because that is so volatile that it disappears. It had to be something off the ocean that was going to blow up, and it had to be able to blow up quite a bit. So it had to be something that was lighter than water and wasn't going to mix with water. Most of our herbicides are designed to mix, or at least intersperse with and agitated in water. So it definitely wasn't a herbicide that was applied into the ocean water. It went from the ocean frontage up. So it's just a process of elimination. Does that make reasonable sense?
Yeah.
Michele, let's go the other side. What else could it have been? Could have been.
It made me think of stormwater pipes. As might be some chemical being washed out, and there's a leakage. They're broken and they're blocked, and that could spread the chemical into the soil. That would make me think of.
Absolutely. So we could have had something like kerosene or diesel spillage going down and then blowing back up. So that could have equally has been the cause. And
perhaps the signs would have been different though, because if it gets absorbed by the roots and kills the roots, what you see on the plant, on most of the plants will be different than what you see here.
Rapid death of the root system if it gets on the roots. But if it had gone down a storm, let's say that a truck up the way had an accident, or somebody had put diesel in their petrol car and they decided to drain it out and run it through the stormwater, that could give a very similar appearance. So, Michele, I'll bow to saying that I can't prove that it was an aircraft that did it, because that would be a good, suitable alternative scenario. But this is certainly in the phytotoxic, probably hydrocarbon chemical basis. So that's been washed up. I would imagine that if there had been a spillage that had gone down through the drains, that somebody probably would have picked that up because it had been fairly concentrated where it came out.
Yeah,
localized.
And fairly obvious. Whereas when you're talking about AVTER, you're talking about a lot smaller amount of material. You're talking about a thin film. But it's quite possible that somebody's had a spill and nobody's notified anybody about it. Poisoning doesn't seem to be something that people will get concerned about in general. But this is their backyard, and it's interesting, all this side was damaged, the top ends, but underneath the plant material was nowhere near as badly affected. So that was when I started to think, what's happened? No, broad range of plant material, it's definitely not a biotic disease. It has to be abiotic. And it's not being translocated through the plant, so it's not a systemic herbicide. So it's something that's phytotoxic, which gets us back to one of those things that are going to cause
you eating? Let's eat.
Damage on contact. Salt water does something similar to that, but nowhere near this extensive. And if any of you spend time near the beach, you'll see the occasional bit of burn, but this is just phenomenal. So definitely not. I think people, you're near the water end of your end of the world. You'll see the tips burn off. You might lose, 25 mils off the end. You'll never see massive amounts of damage occurring.
Jesus.
So again, when things underneath aren't being affected, that should give you some ideas. This is glyphosate poisoning, sublethal. Interesting, plant material underneath was affected. So you can almost pick the spray pattern again. This process of etiolation being produced. This is one of the side effects of a number of the herbicides, but it's the distorted tissue. And you can pick the spray pattern from this balcony. I'm not going to say that the guy did it, but from this balcony right across, you can see the spray out pattern in the way it's affected the plant. So I'm suspecting that somebody stood up on that balcony with a spray unit and sprayed. To the point that I think the pattern is fairly obvious, don't you? There's the overspray. So if someone sprayed, question is, how do they get it so targeted? There's usually giveaways with overspray.
I'm watching it on that.
And again, whoever is on that mobile, just be careful. You're making a lot of things. This looks like poisoning. Really does. This is an erythrina. So I got called out to this one because they said, look, we think our tree's been poisoned. What do you think?
I can't see the clustering. It could be.
There's a little bit of clustering here and here and here and here, but the tree seems to have grown past some of that clustering. But
It's deciduous tree, deciduous.
It is deciduous, but this is possum grazing.
Yeah, I saw one today, the same.
Yeah, it's amazing. So the occasional green leaf that's got the laminatude is a giveaway. So just again, one to be careful not to confuse with poisoning.
The heavy grazing does cause the clustering, isn't it? Because they keep it's like trimming a hedge. You have,
but it's not the same. There's not all the buds there.
yeah.
So there's just a bud there. It's just it's been miniature pollarded, and so and the tips are green. So glyphosate or herbicide damage that's caused complete defoliation. Unless there's a lot of leaves on the ground, you expect those tips to start drying off and dying back. Again, this is sublethal damage on this time a Chinese elm. You can see the clustering of the foliage. Again, glyphosate poisoning in this case. And you can again see the distorted leaves, quite markedly distorted. It's a bigger leaf than the jacaranda. A little bit more obvious. Oh, this is always a good indication when you go to a construction site and see a bottle of Roundup. That may or may not mean anything. But when you see a whole pile of foliage dropping off a fig tree onto the ground, you can maybe tie the two together. But here's the rules. Poisoning a tree in New South Wales, Victoria, Queensland. Don't know about the other areas, but I think that's covered most of the people on the call. Poisoning of a tree is a criminal offence. In New South Wales, it's breach of Section 195 of the Crimes Act. Carries a maximum penalty of 5 years of penal servitude. I don't know that anyone's ever been prosecuted for it, but it is a criminal offence. And the law in relation to criminal offence says that to find someone with a criminal offence, it's got to be beyond reasonable doubt. Well, the question is, who was the person that poured the glyphosate? We don't know, unless you catch them doing it. And then when you catch them doing it, it is pretty difficult. I did get called out to a wonderful poisoning event a few years ago where tissue samples were taken and tested and video evidence was collected. It so happened that the person whose trees they were poisoning was a forensic pathologist and had collected evidence perfectly. But to the best of my knowledge, it was settled and there was no criminal prosecution. So, but yes, this beautiful fig completely destroyed, almost without question by the neighbour. That's pretty obvious. And this is what I'm saying. This is a spade bit, so the flattened bit with a small little triangular tip at the end that's used, a wood bit. And that was on the other side of a fence. The sorry, between a fence and the tree, and very hard to spot. The only thing I got out there was to see the jacaranda looking rather odd, shedding heavily, and I thought, it looks like poisoning, and that's what it was. This again, you know, there's something odd here, this staining or this discoloration that makes me wonder what it is. I don't know whether that's diesel or what it is, but there were a spate of poisonings in the area, and that caused problems. What can you do when that happens to a tree? Water, first of all, dilute things down. In the case if you suspect it's a hydrocarbon, it's probably already done a fair bit of damage, but around the base, surfactant, so a detergent or an agricultural based non-ionic surfactant, there's a whole pile of them on the market. Just to break down the nature of the hydrocarbon, and then there's been a fair bit of work done, not a fair bit, but there's been some work done on using a glucose to help, hang on a second, guys, using glucose to help supplement carbohydrates back into the root system of the tree and back up through the tree. There is a protein in the roots that will transport sugars into the plant. But with all things, again, dose is critical, and a wonderful story told to me by Hugh Taylor of him looking at some trees and suggesting sugar treatment, and he got to the tree, and the tree had lost all of its foliage, and he looked at the base of it, and there were 5 bags of sugar, 5 20-kilogram bags of sugar sitting around the base of the tree. And he said, well, that's probably more sugar than you really want to be putting around a tree of that size. A beautiful old Terraticornis. And they said, oh, well, actually, that's just the last 5. We've already gone through 20 bags. So just because a little is good doesn't mean that a lot is better. A good example of that is, I believe it's somewhere between about 6 and 8 litres of water in a short bout is potentially fatal to a human being, yet we need water. Too much water is not good, okay? So it's this balancing act.
True with diabetes.
So that's it on poisoning for me, guys. Any questions that you want to raise? I just thought it was topical, given that, you know, I saw that in a school.
It was very interesting, Mark. Thank you.
Happy to do it, Peter. Next block.
Thanks, Mark.
What do you want to cover?
Sorry, what was that?
Sorry?
I beg your pardon, what was that?
I said next episode of tips. Is there something that anyone in the group would like us to look at? No one sent me any pictures this month, so you've all failed that assignment.
I have
Vicky-
sent some pictures to Peter.
You hadn't passed them on to me, so I will beat Peter up and we'll do them next block. Wonderful.
Vicky has sent a photo too, but I didn't have time to get it to you.
Yeah, sorry.
I only sent it during the chat. Yeah.
Yeah, so if you can get them to me about a week beforehand, it gives me a chance to put them in the folder and have them all ready for you.
Yeah, it was just a tree that I saw today. We don't know what's wrong with it. Yeah.
Yep, and I'm happy to do in a part of this group that diagnostic work for you. Don't know that we're always going to get there, but it's going through the process. And I think I made clear in the very first tips is that diagnosis is a process. It's not an event. We often get confused and say that it's an event. I've diagnosed the problem. It's the process of diagnosing that's the critical thing. So
would fungi, sorry to interrupt, Mark, would pictures of fungi of fruiting body be interesting for tips, or you want to concentrate more on insects?
Oh, I'm fine with that. I'm more than happy. I think we did discuss doing that for this block round. So
all right, I got a bunch of them then.
Tonight. So yeah, send in fungi. Has anyone had a chance to play with Google Lens yet?
Yes.
Yep.
It's been helpful. Been very good.
It's a great piece of software. So let me encourage you to have a play with that as well. There is work being done on trying to come up with algorithms to try and repeat what we do diagnostically. And one of those dilemmas is people say to me, well, how do you do it? And I remember going out to one of those trees of sublethal glyphosate on a jacaranda, and I walked in the backyard and I said, it's sublethal herbicide damage. And the other arborist said, how do you know? I said, I just know it now. I've seen it so many times, it's automatic. And the question is, what does the brain do? And that's what the algorithms are trying to figure out. And there is a diagnostic algorithm being worked on at the moment for tree diseases. Will it be perfect? No, but it's the start of it. And it wasn't that long ago, we were talking about facial recognition being fairly primitive. Nowadays, facial recognition is down to a fine art. Voice recognition is down to a fine art. Gait, the way that somebody walks, is now a feature. There's an algorithm to identify from video who a person is from their gait. So I have a slightly different gait or walk than you do, David. So it doesn't matter if you try and put on a bit of weight and make yourself look uglier, they're still going to know it's you and not me. So it's amazing where we are going with that sort of technology. So Google Lens, I encourage you to have a play with it because it is really a useful piece of software. Okay, guys. Well, I'll see some of you next Monday. The rest of you I'll see in a month's time.
The
Thanks
best
very
way
much.
to get the pictures
Bye.
to you, Mark, is send it
Thank
to
you very
Peter.
much.
Sorry, what's
Send
that?
it to me, please,
Send
and
it to Peter.
Okay.
email it to me, and I'll watch out for them.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks.
All right. Thank you, Mark. Thanks very much.
Thank
Thank you
you.
very much.
Yeah.